Hello and welcome to this study. In this particular video we're going to be looking at the fall feasts of Israel and the timeline of the 70th week of Daniel and the final 7 years of this age. The 7 feasts of Israel are now starting to appear on the radar screens of biblical Christians, and here in this particular diagram we see them laid out on a Hebrew calendar, which is in the central yellow portion. The first 4 feasts, which we see over on the left-hand side of this chart, showcase the great acts of God in times past, and the 3 fall feasts are over on the right, and the fall feasts are rehearsals of his plans for events that are still future and slated to unfold in times to come. In the 3 spring feasts, we see the priestly ministry of our Messiah as the suffering servant. He was crucified on Passover. He was buried just before sunset. So on that high holy day, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the sinless unleavened bread of heaven was in the grave, fulfilling the feast. 3 days and 3 nights later, and on the morrow after the 7th day Sabbath of Passover, on the Feast of First Fruits, he arose from the grave as the first fruits from the dead. The 50th day, counted out from first fruits, is the Feast of Pentecost, and here we see God's divine visitation by the outpouring of his Holy Spirit, first in righteousness at Sinai, where 3,000 died under the law, and then ultimately and climactically in mercy in Jerusalem, where 3,000 were saved by God's grace under the preaching of the Apostle Peter. The day of Pentecost is the birthday of the nation of Israel at Sinai, and it is the birthday of the congregation of Israel, or as we call it, the church, in Jerusalem back during the Passion Year. So those first 4 feasts, moeds or appointed times, over on the left-hand side of our chart have already been fulfilled. Those 4 epic events erupted into holy history nearly 2,000 years ago during the Passion Year, and right on the Hebrew calendar dates to which they belonged. Over on the right-hand side we see the last 3 appointed times, the fall feasts of Israel. These are yet to emerge in their new covenant fulfillment. We are not told specifically just how they will manifest. They still lie hidden in the mysteries of God, but we know the track record of the God of Israel. We saw it in the first 4 feasts, so we can be sure of this: the 3 fall feasts will erupt into holy history in just as spectacular fashion as the former ones did. In this video we shall take a close look at the first 2 of the 3 fall feasts of Israel, those being the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement. What are they all about? Is it possible that they might connect in some way to a very important time period up ahead, specifically the 70th week of Daniel and the final 7 years of this age? This wonderful item of Hebraic art is by the Jewish artist Yossi Rosenstein, and it is entitled The Final Prayer. It relates to Yom Kippur, the final Yom Kippur at the close of this age. So here are the Feasts of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, the first 2 of the fall feasts. Those 4 feasts are still awaiting fulfillment. They are mysteries yet to be revealed. So are we as followers of Jesus Christ meant to study the Holy Scriptures and look into these things? Are these matters of the kingdom something for the elect to know about? Are we not called to be about our Father's business? Oh yes, and we must not let any man or devil tell us otherwise. These next 2 appointed times are high holy days, so we can be sure that these 2 feasts are consecrated or set apart for the unfolding of 2 very important days in future holy history. Just what will those awesome events be? How will they erupt onto the world's scene on those special dates in future years? And why? What will be their specific purpose? Well, in this video we're not going to be able to go further into that fascinating subject. We'll cover that in a subsequent study. In this video we'll focus on the timeline of the final 7 years of this age and how they may relate to those 2 coming appointed times. Now let's pause and ask ourselves a question. What is the most important end-time Bible prophecy? For Bible prophecy students, this is a no-brainer. It is Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks, with the very important info that there is a 7-year period of time yet to run before the climax of the age. So here we go with our investigation, and like all proper studies, we begin with a good question and a theory based upon some facts. Could these next two fall feasts, the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, be related in some way to the upcoming, yet to be fulfilled 70th week of Daniel? The future 70th week of Daniel involves the final 7 years of this age. So our question is simply this: is it possible that these next two feasts perhaps even bracket or stake out this extremely important future time period, the final 7 years of this age? We know from our study of the 70 weeks prophecy that the future 70th week of Daniel is the most important future time period for us to know about. This future heptad of years, or sabbatical cycle of 7 years, completes the 70 weeks prophecy. As we read in Daniel 9:24, this is a time that has been determined or set apart for divine purpose. So these final 7 years have been determined or cut out of time by God for dealings with all of his covenant people, and this includes both houses of Israel. And yes, this involves the church as well as national Israel and the Jewish house of Judah. We also know how the story of this age ends. It will end climactically with the return of Messiah. So we're going to be checking out some clues here that indicate that something is connected that has not been noticed before. Our study of the biblical context in Daniel 9:27 shows us that those final 7 years take us right through to the end of the age. So might this time period be important enough to warrant special holy days to mark its beginning and its ending? Apparently so, as we shall see. And how will the future 70th week of Daniel begin? It will be initiated by the confirmation of a 7-year covenant with many. The 7-year covenant is outlined in Daniel 9:27. The starting gun for the final 7 years of this age will begin with the confirmation of this 7-year covenant between a prince and many. This will be a sovereignty giveaway of momentous importance. It will not only involve Israel, but the G7 nations currently holding the reins of world power. So here is our question again, perhaps a little bit more specifically this time. Could it be that these next two feasts, moeds or holy days, appointed times, actually stake out the final 7 years of this age? If they do, we will insist that the timeline nestles in between those two fall feasts precisely to the very day. If it does not, then we can forget it. We serve a holy God, and there's no time for any foolishness. We know that a 7-year treaty with a prince initiates the final 7 years of this age. We also know that this will be a treaty with a man, which will involve a surrender of national sovereignty. The flags of the nations will be coming down. So is it possible that the confirmation of this 7-year covenant will be attended by an epic blowing of trumpets, trumpets of alarm? Well, that's a very interesting question, isn't it? And we're going to be looking into that in a subsequent video. And now let's take a look at the 6th feast. Is it possible that the yet to be fulfilled appointed time holy day, that is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, might be the last day, the judgment day, that actually terminates the final 7 years of this age? Well, that's starting to come into focus quite clearly now. If the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement do make a precise fit into the timeline of the final 7 years of this age, then what are we to say? It will mean that the Holy One of Israel has led us to a major discovery. He is giving us a bird's eye view of the end time and providing us with accurate information and a good layout of the final 7 years of this age. Straight away we can know that the beginning of the 70th week begins in the fall season of the year and it ends in the fall season of the year. But there is more, as we shall see. So let's cut to the chase. From Daniel 9:27 we read that the prince who shall come will confirm a strong binding covenant with many for 1 week or 1/7. This is a sabbatical cycle of 7 years. And the reference to many implies that this sovereignty-sharing treaty will be brokered with the Judeo-Christian people of national Israel and also lost amnesic Israel out in the Western nations and other nations of the world. So the 70th week is a time period of 7 years. As we established in our earlier videos on Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks, especially video number 3 and videos number 10a and 10b, these are not solely years of 365.2422 days. The days dispensed to us from the throne of God are biblical years of 360 days. So the future 70th week is 7 times 360 equals 2,520 days. In Daniel 9:27 we see that at the midpoint of the 70th week there is a major reference point in our timeline. This is called the abomination that makes desolate. This big event is also spoken of by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. The abomination of desolation divides the 2520 days of the 70th week into two halves, each of 1260 days. The latter 1260-day segment is described from varying perspectives in 7 very special Bible verses. We find 2 of them in the book of Daniel and 5 of them in the book of Revelation. You can pause the video here if you like and check out these 7 verses for yourself. The midpoint of the 2520 days of the 70th week, the abomination of desolation, is at the end of the first 1260 days. Going out a further 1260 days from the midpoint abomination of desolation, we come to the end of the Great Tribulation. It is also the end of the trampling of Jerusalem, the end of the end-time witness, and the end of the exile of the woman. The end of that second 1260-day time period will see the tumult and the travail described in those 7 verses come to a complete halt. What happens after that? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. So there are 2 consecutive time spans of 1260 days, 3.5 years, or 42 months. The second 3.5 years is the Great Tribulation. After committing the mid-70th week abomination, the 666 beast will be revealed for who he really is, and during the latter half of the 70th week, he will be ruling in his own right. And so we ask the obvious question that few Bible teachers want to address or talk about. What will be happening during those first 3.5 years? We find our answer in Revelation chapter 17. Here, the Apostle John sees the 10-horned beast, but when he sees it this time, in this particular vision, a harlot woman is riding on its back and attempting to control it. This must be before the beast is revealed at midweek. It must be as this new global entity first impacts world history. So during the first half of the 70th week, the New World Order is cloaked with the robes of compromised religion. When John saw this vision of the harlot riding the beast, he was amazed. He was absolutely flabbergasted at what he was seeing. So at this earlier time, the harlot is ruling. John was astounded at what he was seeing. The woman had shunned the call to holiness. She had very deliberately set out to take dominion and to rule over the world in her own right, and before Messiah had come. She had named, claimed, and now, as John saw her, she had finally attained. She had what she wanted. She had achieved success. So the harlot is ruling, or trying to rule, during those first 1260 days. She rules during those 3.5 years before the Great Tribulation. It's important to understand that the 70th week, that is those 1260 plus 1260 equals 2520 days, do not make up all of the final 7 years of this age. When we look over at the end of the second span of 1260 days, we see the end of the Great Tribulation and the end of the trampling of Jerusalem. This is at day 1260 as measured out from the midpoint abomination of desolation. The 1260 days of the Great Tribulation will also be characterized by the dual end-time witness of the saints. That is the ministry of the 2 witnesses. In Revelation 11:3, we see that this end-time witness of the saints will last for that same time period of 1260 days. What happens then? In the Olivet Discourse, we read that immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will turn to blood. So after the 1260 days of the Great Tribulation come these awesome cosmic signs. In Revelation chapter 6, John describes these same epic events as being the signs of the 6th seal. And in Joel 2, we see that these same cosmic disturbances attend the climax of the Holy Spirit outpouring, and they precede and foreshadow the opening of the day of the Lord. This period of time, which is associated with the cosmic signs, apparently goes on for a certain length of time. And remember, this is after the Great Tribulation. We know this for an absolute certainty, because Jesus himself said so when he answered questions on this matter posed to him by Peter, James, and John in the Olivet Discourse. And the scripture is as follows: immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, etc. This period after the Great Tribulation of those days are the days of the cosmic signs of the 6th seal, and quite clearly they go on for a length of time beyond the 1260 days. Does this time period extend out to the end of the age? And how many more days beyond the Great Tribulation will there be until we get to the end of the age? We find our answer in Daniel 12:11. The angel Gabriel tells the prophet Daniel, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days." So now we see that there is a 1,290-day time period extending out from the mid-70th week abomination of desolation. The 1,290 days overlap the 1,260 days of the latter half of the 70th week. How far over does it go beyond the 70th week? Well, if it goes out to 1,290 days, we're looking at an extra 30 days. So we are bound to conclude that the time period of the sixth seal before Messiah comes at the seventh seal is a period of 30 days. Brothers and sisters, this is the real blood moon. The blood moon highlighted in Holy Scripture is not just a transient red phase of a lunar eclipse. For 30 days, people all over this earth will see a darkened sun, a bloody moon, and meteor showers like stars falling. What will have happened to cause these epic cosmic signs and this damage to the atmosphere? Do we have any clues from the Holy Scripture? Yes, we do. In the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and in Luke 21, Jesus states that except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So what can we conclude from this statement? Simply this: at day 1260, a terrible calamity will cause global atmospheric contamination. This will be an event of immense magnitude. It will be a calamity of such destructive power that if there were to be no divine intervention, the events set in process here would go on to destroy all life on this planet. What could that apocalyptic disaster be? Well, here's some further information. The prophet Joel spoke of blood and fire and pillars of smoke. He also spoke of the cosmic disturbances turning the sun to darkness and the moon to blood. Joel specifically linked it as an omen to the opening of the day of the Lord. And Jesus said that if the days were not cut short, no life on this planet would survive. So what awful global calamity could threaten this world with such terrible destruction? The prophet Joel spoke of blood and fire and pillars of smoke. Could it be this? Would such a terrible event as this, the end result of godless human rule and human folly, actually be capable of polluting the atmosphere across the whole earth? And would not an event like this escalate to destroy all life on this planet if profane, man-centered, humanistic rule was not stopped? And would not such an event be the occasion for divine intervention with the return of Messiah? The Apostle Paul had something to say about this as well. He said there in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, that the coming of the Messiah will terminate the tyrannical rule of that wicked one, the Antichrist. From Revelation 13:5 and Daniel 12:7, we see that the reign of the Antichrist and the Great Tribulation period lasts for 1,260 days, 42 biblical months, 3.5 biblical years. So this divine termination of the government of the Antichrist and the false prophet must come at day 1260, as measured out from the midpoint abomination of desolation. So now we can ask the question, does the future 70th week completely and totally wrap up the final 7 years of this age? Well, from what the angel Gabriel told the prophet Daniel in Daniel 12:11, it seems that the answer is no. There we see specific mention not of 1,260 days, but of 1,290 days. And as we see here from the wording of the text, the 1,290 days takes us right through to the very end of this present evil age. This 1,290 days is very definitely a continuation of holy time beyond the 1,260 days of the Great Tribulation. So we are bound to conclude that there will be an extra 30-day time period going up beyond the 1,260 days of the Great Tribulation to make up the 1,290 days. From what Jesus tells us in the Olivet Discourse, this 30-day period going out beyond the Great Tribulation is attended by those awesome cosmic signs, signs we saw in Revelation 6 that are the signs of the sixth seal. This 30-day time period will be taking us beyond the 1,260 days to arrive at a very significant terminus and the closure of this age at 1,290 days. So the Great Tribulation is over, the trampling of Jerusalem has ended, And so we ask the question, what is this extra time period for? All through the poetic and apocalyptic scriptures, we see references to God pleading with people to repent while there is still time. So are we looking here at a 30-day grace period? And have we heard that term, 30-day grace period, before? If those extra 30 days are indeed a grace period, then what does that tell us about our God? Is he not showing its incredible patience and mercy here? It would appear that he's giving wayward mankind a 30-day extension to set their affairs in order and to repent and to receive his offered salvation. The book of Revelation can be viewed as a divine court case over which the Ancient of Days presides. He's taken control of everything that happens during this time period and setting the limits on the things that happen down here below. Proceedings will ultimately be wrapped up on an epic future day of reckoning. Is it possible that this is a time God has allowed for his people to consider their spiritual condition before they see him face to face? Is this an extension of time for people to settle their accounts with God and to make reconciliation before the gavel falls on Judgment Day? And does that future Judgment Day, if it is indeed day 1290 from the midpoint, does it fall appropriately and auspiciously on the 6th Moed, or 6th appointed time, the final Yom Kippur, the wrap-up Day of Atonement? Let's look into that possibility, and we're going to measure out the timeline and see if it fits. So here's the time period we have measured out for the final 7 years of this age. It is a time period of 1260 plus 1260 plus 30, or 1260 plus 1290, or 2550 days. Do the 2550 days neatly and precisely bridge those two feasts when they are 7 years apart? That's the question. Does the time segment between the Feast of Trumpets and the final wrap-up Day of Atonement 7 years later happen to match the 2550 days? Do these holy days actually start and finish the final 7 years of this age? We'll be taking a close look at a few 7-year periods up ahead as they run from the Feast of Trumpets, Tishri 1 on a given year, through to Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, Tishri 10, 7 years later. The time periods span either 86 or 87 moons, depending on whether there are 2 or 3 extra embolismic months of Adar added into the Hebrew calendar for that particular 7-year span between the 2 Tishri moons. This is dependent upon where that particular 7-year timeline sits in the 19-year Metonic cycle. If you Google the phrase Metonic cycles, you'll see my article on this subject. The Metonic cycle adds an extra month of Adar into the Hebrew calendar in 7 of those 19 years in the cycle. As we shall discover, the time periods that span 86 moons and not 87 moons, measured out from trumpets to atonement, provide a very interesting comparison to the 2550 days that we measured out for the final 7 years of this age. When we look at our Hebrew calendar from Tishri 1, Feast of Trumpets, and consider this day 1, and then we go out 7 years to Tishri 10, the Day of Atonement, which is 86 moons and 9 days later, how many days are there between those 2 feast days? Using the lunar cycles as our measuring line, we can get a pretty good idea within an error factor of a day or so. The lunar mean synodic month going new moon to new moon is 29.530588 days. Measuring out the 86 moons, we multiply 86 by 29.530588, and we get that number, which rounded off to the day is 2540 days. This is from Tishri 1 to Tishri 1. For Tishri 1 to Tishri 10, we add an extra 9 days, and so we add 9 days to our 2540 days, and we get 2549 days. Well, this is looking very promising. We lay out our timeline on a given Tishri 1, and we'll call this day number 1. Then we go out from day 1 the further 2549 days, which are our measurement of the 86 moons and 9 days that take us to the Day of Atonement. And when we arrive on the Day of Atonement, what is the number of that day? Well, 2549 days from day 1 brings us to day 2550. So our inclusive time span between the feasts 7 years apart, as measured by the lunar cycles, is actually 2550 days. So for a given Tishri 1 to Tishri 10 feast to feast time span across a given 7-year period, with 2 of those years having an extra month of Adar to make 86 moons, The final 7 years of this age could very well comprise 2,550 days inclusive. Remember, there's an error factor of plus or minus 1 day due to uncertainties associated with the new moon sighting. So for an accurate measurement of our timeline, we shall have to consult the NASA astronomical new moon data for the month and the year in question and make a judgment as to whether or not the new moon will be seen or not seen on a given sunset following. Then we can construct a biblically correct Hebrew calendar in which to lay out our timeline more precisely. So we've measured other lunar cycles for our time period, and we've got a full inclusive time period of 2,550 days. Keep that number 2,550 in mind, because we're going to survey the 7-year candidates for the future 70th week and final 7 years of this age that are up ahead. Here are some 7-year time periods that are coming up. Those 7-year spans marked in yellow span 86 moons from Tishri to Tishri. The 7-year span beginning in 2014 and the one beginning in 2017 both qualify as candidates for the final 7 years of this age. Will one or both of them bridge exactly 2,550 days? We don't know yet. It could be a day over or a day less, depending on vagaries that accompany the sighting of the new moon. We are certainly not going to use the official Hebrew calendar to do this precise reckoning. It's just plain wrong. After 1,650 years, it's drifting off the mark. It tends to be a day early in declaring the new moon. The day Hillel's calculated calendar assigns as the first day of the month is now turning out to be a day earlier than the true and biblically correct day that would be determined from the sighted moon. The 7-year period beginning in 2014 bears very careful watching because of the highly unusual eclipse cluster. There is a heptad of 4 lunar eclipses coming in 2014 and 2015, right across Passover and Tabernacles during those 2 years. They were discovered by Pastor Mark Biltz back in 2008, and his discovery may prove to be highly significant and important as an omen for something coming. The lunar eclipse tetrad have been called blood moons, and yes, the penumbra phase of the lunar eclipse does appear red for a brief minute or so, but quite frankly, for this eclipse cluster to be named blood moons is very unfortunate. Such a name cloaks and obfuscates the true bloody moon associated with the very late post-tribulational cosmic signs of the sixth seal. The eclipse cluster is certainly an important omen, but it should in no way replace the rock-solid, biblically sound connection of the bloody moon and the complete package of those 3 cosmic signs associated with the sixth seal, as described by Joel in Joel 2:29 through 31, and Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24:29 through 30, and John in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verses 12 through 17. These post-tribulational cosmic disturbances are a far bigger deal than the eclipse cluster of 2014 and 2015. They last more than just a few seconds. The true blood moon lasts for 30 days. It will be an epic event observed worldwide, and it will be accompanied by other cosmic signs of the sun turning to darkness and a spectacular meteor shower of which the stars appear to be falling. This is the real blood moon, not the lunar eclipse heptad of 2014 and 2015. As we see in the middle of our chart here, the eclipse cluster also includes a solar eclipse. It happens to land right on Nisan 1, the religious new year of 2015. This eclipse cluster, with major astronomical events all marking significant Hebrew calendar dates, is highly unusual, and it looks like it might be very important. It has been presented as the blood moon and a sign of the sixth seal at one point, and its characterization as a blood moon caused it to be considered as a candidate for the terminus of the age. But as we have seen, this is most certainly not the case. Just before the 2008 Feast of Trumpets, there was a lot of speculation of an imminent rapture, but this time has come and gone. So could the eclipses be a sign or a portent for the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel? Is the eclipse cluster an omen for the start of the final 7 years of this age? This is a very real possibility, and it bears careful watching. So the Tishri 1 2014 to Tishri 10 2021 time period, with the eclipses at its beginning, will be our first candidate as we measure out the time period for what could possibly be the final 7 years of this age. Then we'll go on to the 2017 to 2024 time span, and so on, because this one is a candidate as well, and there are ones following, of course. So with that in mind, let's lay out the time span beginning with Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets of 2014. The Jewish calendar gives us a date of September 25th, but can we trust it? The moon is drifting away from the earth, and the lunar cycle is slowing by 1 second every 36 years. So if the lunar cycle has changed, has this affected the Hebrew calendar as was set forth by Hillel back in 359 AD? Well, the answer is very much so. Hillel was a meticulous Jewish scholar, and were he alive today, he himself would probably want to see the calendar corrected. The Hebrew calendar needs to be reset by the NASA lunar data with confirmation by the sighted new moon as viewed from Jerusalem. Confirmation by the sighted new moon is what the Karaite Jews want, and it is what many biblical Christians would like to see as well. So our current situation is this: the Jewish calendar now tends to declare the new moon prematurely, to begin the month a day earlier than the actual sighted moon. With the Jewish calendar in hand, we can look up into the night sky and above the setting sun on the eve of the first day of the Jewish month, and what do we see? Absolutely nothing. No sign of that thin sliver, the crescent of the new moon. What has happened? Well, after 1650 years, Hillel's calculated Hebrew calendar is drifting off the mark. It is in serious need of reform. Is this likely to be fixed anytime soon? Probably not. It will have to wait until Messiah gets here. So let's put the official Jewish calendar aside, and let's go with the biblical calendar as determined by the cycles of the sun and the moon and our expectation of the new moon sighting. The NASA website shown here gives us the lunar moon phase data for the years in question up ahead, and quite accurately too, down to the minute. We'll start by going into that year 2014, and we'll find the date and the time for the astronomical new moon for the month of Tishri, which is the 7th month. Then we shall determine when the new moon will be seen in Jerusalem. This will mark Tishri 1, Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets, to mark day 1 for our timeline. The springtime month of Nisan is the first moon to see the barley ripe, or Abib, for harvest. Abib is a Hebrew word meaning ripe, and so Abib is another name for the Passover month of Nisan. By astronomical reckoning, Nisan is the first moon that will come to fullness after the spring or vernal equinox. The spring equinox comes around March 20th of our solar Roman calendar. And counting out from that springtime equinoctial Nisan moon, the 7th moon will be the month of Tishri. For most months, setting forth a Hebrew calendar is not a problem. Occasionally, there is a question as to whether the new moon will be sighted or not sighted on a given evening. But with access to the NASA website, a class of 7th graders can construct a biblically correct Hebrew calendar and have their calendar agree with each other most of the time. He or she can do this for as many years into the past or future as they care to. The Karaite Jews, like biblical Christians, strive to be faithful to the Holy Scriptures. As they affirm, the gold standard to set the true Hebrew calendar is still the sighted new moon, as viewed from Jerusalem with 2 or more confirming witnesses. But using the NASA data, we can accurately predict when that new moon will be sighted most of the time. So with that in mind, let's proceed on. Here is the moon phase data from the NASA website for the year 2014. The astronomical moon of Nisan is the first moon to come to fullness after the spring equinox, which is March 20th. That full moon of April 16th, here marked in yellow, is the date for the first full moon after the spring equinox, and so that moon is going to be the Nisan moon. And here in the first column marked in yellow is the date and the universal time for the astronomical new moon that marks the beginning of that very same month, the month of Nisan, in 2014. From that first month on the Hebrew calendar, the month of Nisan, we count down to row number 7, and right there in the first column is the astronomical new moon for the 7th month, and that 7th month is the month of Tishri. So our time for the astronomical new moon for Tishri in 2014 is on September the 24th, and it is just after sunrise at 6:15 a.m. Universal Time, or Greenwich Mean Time. The NASA new moon times are given to us in Universal Time. In the former British era, this was called Greenwich Time. The prime meridian still goes through Greenwich, England. And when we make the adjustment for the longitude of Jerusalem, we find that we must add 2 hours and 21 minutes to the universal time given to us by the NASA tables. And so the time for the astronomical new moon, as it would be measured on the clock in Jerusalem, is 8:35 a.m. on September the 24th. Our 2 new moon sighting opportunities at Jerusalem will come a little after sunset on one of the 2 sunsets following the astronomical new moon. There will be sunset on the night of September the 24th and sunset on the night of September the 25th. The sunset during which the new moon is sighted will mark the beginning of the first day of the month of Tishri. Let's look at our first candidate, the sunset of the 24th. At that time, around 6:30 p.m., the new moon will be just 10 hours old. As stated on the website of the U.S. Naval Observatory, the new moon is not usually visible until it is 24 hours old. So we can say this with very good assurance. The new moon will definitely not be sighted that night. So even though the Hebrew calendar is declaring this sunset to be the beginning of Tishri 1 and the commencement of the month of Tishri, and Jewish tradition is ringing in the Jewish New Year, there is no way this thin sliver of the new moon will be seen that night. And so September the 25th will not be Tishri 1 as God sees it, at least not under his heaven and viewed from his holy city. Sometimes we need to leave religious tradition behind and get back to biblical basics. This is such a time. Remember, we are looking into the time's future that God himself has told us about. In Genesis 1:14-16, God, speaking through Moses, declared that he gave the sun and the moon for times and seasons. The word for season in Hebrew is moed, and it means seasons, appointed times, holy days, feasts. If we are to have a calculated calendar, then that's fine, but we must follow the sun and the moon. These heavenly bodies are the timepieces God himself has set in their orbits. He was telling us clearly in the Torah to use the equinoxes of the sun and the new moon sightings to set the calendar and thereby determine the appointed times for the feasts and the high holy days. At some point, God's covenant people from both houses of Israel are going to have to get around to doing this. So let's start right now. Here on the sunset of September the 24th of 2014, we have a new moon. It's just 10 hours old. It's low on the horizon. It's a mere sliver. Even with the aid of binoculars or even a telescope, this embryonic new moon, just 10 hours old, is still not going to be visible. And yet, here using the online Hebrew date converter from hebcal.com, we have the official Jewish calendar, and it is proclaiming Tishri 1, Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, to be September the 25th. But clearly, the official Jewish calendar is quite incorrect. The moon is only 10 hours old. There is no way the new moon can be sighted in Jerusalem after sunset this night. It's far too early. There will be no new moon sighted that night and no confirming witnesses. So in truth, September the 25th of 2014 will not be the true and legitimate Rosh Hashanah. So let's go on to the sunset of the following night of September the 25th. This will be the new moon viewing opportunity number 2 for the Tishri moon. This time the new moon will be 34 hours old, so it will be readily visible that night. So by the authority of Moses, who declared that those heavenly bodies, the sun and the moon, will be our timepieces, this new moon sighting being quite visible on the night of September the 25th will mark September the 26th in the fall of 2014 as the true and sighted new moon and Tishri 1. So in truth, the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the Hebrew Civil New Year in 2014, will in fact be September the 26th and not September the 25th. Now that we've determined that the true Tishri 1 of 2014 will be September the 26th, let's mark this as day 1 and go on 7 years in time and into the fall feasts of 2021. And let's see if we can locate and confirm our Gregorian calendar date for Tishri 10, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, for 2021. Remember, we are wondering if that day of reckoning might come on day 2550 to mark out a precise terminus for the end of this age. Again, we go to the NASA website and we look up the lunar moon phase data at this address. Alternatively, you could just Google NASA moon phase data and that will take you to the portal. In 2021, the astronomical new moon of Tishri comes on September the 7th at 052 hours UTC Greenwich time, Jerusalem time for this event will be 2 hours 21 minutes later on the clock, or 3:13 a.m. in the morning. So at sunset of September the 7th at 18:30 hours or thereabouts, the new moon will be a bit over 15 hours old. Will it be seen? It's a long way from being 24 hours old, so the answer is probably not. But on the following night at sunset of September the 8th, the new moon will be over 39 hours old. It should be well up from the horizon at that time and well above the atmospheric interference. The crescent of the new moon should be thick enough to be seen quite easily. So if the new moon is sighted on the night of September 8, this will mark the beginning of Tishri 1 and the beginning of the new Hebrew day, which begins at sunset. So this will coincide with the Gregorian date of September the 9th. So Tishri 1 on the true Hebrew calendar is September the 9th. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is Tishri 10. This comes 9 days after Tishri 1, so the biblically correct Day of Atonement for 2021 will come 9 days after September the 9th, on September the 18th of 2021. Will this be day number 2550? Well, we're going to find out. We now have the Gregorian dates for these two feast days. There is just one last task left to perform. Just how many days are there that bridge these two feast dates of September the 26th, 2014 and September the 18th of 2021? Let's start by measuring across 7 years on the same date. How many days are there between September the 26th of 2014 and September the 26th of 2021? The 7 years contain 7 times 365 days, or 2555 days, and since 2016 and 2020 are leap years, we add 2 days to make 2557 days. 2557 days was the time span between 2014 and 2021 from identical Gregorian dates of September the 26th. Now we ask, how many days are there between the two feast dates, which are September the 26th, 2014, and backwards 8 days to September the 18th, 2021. We have 2557 days between September the 26th of 2014 and September the 26th of 2021. So from September the 26th of 2014 and September the 18th of 2021 is 8 days less. 8 days less than 2557 days gives us 2549 days. So when we do the math, we find out the distance between these two feast dates is 2549 days. The inclusive, encompassing time span starts from day 1, and we go on a further 2549 days, and where do we end up? We arrive on day 2550. So the inclusive bridging time span encompassing both these feasts is in fact precisely 2550 days. This is a precise fit for the 1260 plus 1290 equals 2550 days. We know from the Holy Scripture that the exact time period of the final 7 years of this age is also 2550 days. Well, that's very, very interesting. The bridging time span between the two feasts, 2014 through 2021, is exactly 2550 days. How about the time span 2017 to 2024? Well, when we go through the same process that we did with the 2014 to 2021 time period, we make this interesting discovery. Again, we come to 2550 days. So both of these time spans do actually make a precise fit between the two feasts. This chart is very, very interesting. Here are some upcoming inclusive day counts between the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement for some future 7-year time spans. The ones marked in yellow encompass 86 moons and not 87 moons. Those marked with the asterisk present us with timelines of precisely 2550 days. Some of us will be pleased to know that the 2014 to 2021 timeline is not the only one with 2550 days. There are other later candidates out there, decades away, that fit the bill quite nicely, but they are not heralded by the extraordinary eclipse cluster as we see for these 7 years that begin in 2014. And so making our peace with God is important. And as we look at what is left of the moral cesspool that once was Western Christendom, we realize that the days we take for granted are tenuous. We can also see that there is just one more domino to fall before God begins his determined dealings to save and to deliver many. So now is a time of salvation. And from what we are seeing on the world scene today, the very best thing that we can do is to invite the living Messiah into our life to minister to us and to guide us. Such a decision and resolve would not come 1 minute too early. So what does all this mean? Well, we are now starting to get a pretty good idea as to what will be happening when those two feast dates break out in their end-time story. The first appointed time, the Feast of Trumpets, presents a holy day and a Hebrew calendar date over which we should be especially watchful in the coming years. And when it erupts into holy history in the fall season of some future year, the number of people that call themselves watchmen will be very few, because on that day their lives will immediately come under deadly peril. But the saints will be blessed. With the information that we have here and with the trumpet warning on Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets, God's people will immediately have an accurate 7-year roadmap with very precise waypoints and a very certain terminus point. This will be extremely informative and encouraging for them as they go up to witness in the latter days. Some will insist that all this is just so much arcane head knowledge and of no relevance or importance to the modern or postmodern Christian believer. But please remember this: our walk with God is not just an intellectual matter. If we love him, we will walk with him. And if we walk with him, we will ask questions, and we'll search the scriptures, and we'll wait on him for answers. Our progress as pilgrims is not a head trip. It primarily hinges upon issues of the heart. Each one of us is being wooed into the heart of the shepherd. He knows that the way ahead will be difficult for us. That's why he has sent the Holy Spirit to be our comforter, our strengthener, and our guide. We cannot study the end time without being drawn by God into devotion to him. And as we study the Holy Scriptures, we soon come to realize that we are not permanent citizens of the nations of this world. Rather, we are pilgrims on a journey towards a better country and a city with eternal foundations. It is the holy city that Abraham saw, a city not made with hands, whose builder and maker is God. I hope you have found this study helpful. Other videos on end-time Bible prophecy can be found on the YouTube channel under the username Gavin Finley. And there are also a number of articles on similar themes over at the website endtimepilgrim.org. Grace and shalom to all.